Princess Catherine reveals truth about her secret fourth pregnancy at palace dinner. The royal family gathered, expecting a night of formality and speeches. Instead, what Catherine whispered across the table turned the evening into a storm that no one, least of all Queen Camilla, saw coming. The palace had staged the dinner as a glittering reminder of tradition, filled with dignitaries, lords, and family members, all poised under the chandeliers of centuries-old grandeur. Every detail was meant to project unity. Yet beneath the surface, unspoken tensions simmered like cracks beneath polished marble. It was meant to be a celebration of continuity, but in reality, it became the stage for an eruption that no carefully crafted protocol could contain. From the beginning, unease clung to the air. King Charles, frail and weary, was present but diminished, his smile faltering in ways too noticeable to disguise. His illness cast an unspoken shadow over the room. William, positioned at his side, carried himself with quiet firmness, his every gesture hinting at the role he was slowly stepping into. Princess Anne, ever the silent sentinel, surveyed the table with piercing eyes, noticing subtleties others missed. Yet it was not Charles or William who commanded attention. It was Catherine, her silence more powerful than any speech. She smiled politely when spoken to, nodded at scripted compliments, but her mind seemed elsewhere. There was no sparkle in her small laughter, no warmth in her polite exchanges. Anne noticed first, leaning slightly forward as though trying to read Catherine's thoughts. Even the guests, well-versed in the pageantry of royal dinners, sensed it. Something in Catherine's manner unsettled them. Not fatigue, not distraction, but a heaviness, an invisible weight pressing on her shoulders. Midway through the toasts, the facade began to slip. As a senior minister stood to honor the king's service, Catherine reached for her glass, held it aloft, then set it down without touching it to her lips. The sound of crystal against oak echoed louder than it should, jolting those nearby. Her hands rested on the table, steady yet purposeful, as though anchoring herself against an internal storm. Conversation faltered. All eyes instinctively turned toward her. At that moment, she did not speak, yet her silence screamed louder than words. The tension in the hall grew unbearable. William glanced at her, his expression taut with both fear and recognition. This was not planned, not rehearsed. Catherine was about to do something no one had expected, not even him. Her eyes lingered on his face, not in hesitation but in resolve, as though drawing strength from his presence. That lingering gaze told a story of months of secrecy, whispered discussions behind closed doors, and a burden she could no longer hide. The air grew thick, each heartbeat echoing like a drum against the walls. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether to maintain conversation or brace for what was coming. Camilla raised her chin, narrowing her eyes, perhaps sensing something that would unravel her carefully controlled grip on the family dynamic. Still, Catherine sat silent, her lips pressed together, her gaze unwavering. Then, with the smallest of movements, she placed her hands in her lap and drew a measured breath. A storm was gathering, and she knew once it was unleashed, there would be no turning back. The whispers would end, the silence would shatter, and her truth would break open in a way no palace aid could contain. But it was Catherine's next move, the truth she had carried in silence, that detonated like thunder across the royal table. For months, whispers had circled the palace corridors, doctors arriving at dawn, Catherine missing engagements, excuses of fatigue. Now, the truth she had kept hidden was about to emerge. To the public, her absences were explained in carefully worded statements. Routine rest, private matters, slight exhaustion. Yet those who knew the rhythm of royal life sensed something deeper. It wasn't like Catherine to step back, certainly not from moments where her presence had always been a source of strength. Behind Windsor's walls, secrets grew heavier with every passing week. There were hushed consultations with physicians entering through side gates before dawn, their visits concealed as if preparing for a delicate state matter. But this wasn't political. It was personal. Catherine carried a burden no skilled courtier could disguise. She smiled when she had to, waved from car windows, but in the quiet of the night, she bore fears only a mother could understand. Palace aides, trained in deflection, played their part with precision. Whenever Catherine missed an event, explanations were vague: a headache, a virus, the weight of responsibilities. Yet the press was never satisfied. Speculation spread through tabloids, questions of her health, whispers of marital strain, even talk of quiet disagreements with Camilla. None were true, but all were dangerous, threatening to expose a reality Catherine wasn't ready to share. Within those stone walls, she endured the torment of secrecy, fearing betrayal not only from the press, but from within the palace. History had shown how fragile trust could be, how leaks could twist private suffering into a cruel spectacle. Catherine dreaded her truth reaching the world before she was ready. With each day, she carried the unbearable weight in silence. William stood by her through sleepless nights, urging patience, begging her to wait until the moment was right. He feared one wrong step could ignite a scandal that would destroy not just Catherine, but their children's future. "Wait," he whispered repeatedly. "The truth must be yours to reveal, not theirs to steal." But how long could anyone endure such crushing silence? Catherine's heart ached with grief, fear, and a determination that the child she carried in memory would not be forgotten. That moment of decision came not through strategy or counsel, but through instinct. The royal dinner was meant to display stability, yet Catherine chose it as her battlefield. Surrounded by family, dignitaries, and those who would twist her silence into weakness, she resolved to turn sorrow into strength. Here, in front of them all, she would reclaim her voice and strip away the shadows that had haunted her. When Catherine rose, steady but trembling, every fork and goblet froze in midair. It began with 5 words: "I was pregnant again." The room, at once filled with polite laughter and clinking cutlery, collapsed into silence. Her voice was steady, her tone deliberate, but the weight behind it landed like thunder. For years, she had been the embodiment of restraint, the royal figure who never faltered, who never revealed what wasn't meant for the world. Yet here, at a table lined with power, history, and expectation, she dismantled that silence with a truth no one had anticipated. The reaction was instant. Camilla's hand trembled as her wine glass slipped, tilting and spilling across the polished table, her shock too raw to disguise. To her, Catherine's words were not just personal, they were a challenge, a reminder that the woman she had once dismissed as timid possessed a power she could not contain. Across the table, King Charles paled. His frail health had already stirred whispers, and this revelation struck him like a physical blow. The idea of another heir, hidden and suddenly unveiled, left him staring into the void, visibly weakened before his guests. Princess Anne, always Catherine's quiet defender, was the first to break the frozen air with a look. She turned sharply to William, eyes narrowing, searching for confirmation. Her silence spoke volumes. This wasn't just shocking. It was uncalculated, unapproved, unleashed without the shield of palace control. William didn't meet her gaze. He didn't need to. His clenched jaw and tightened grip on Catherine's hand told the story. He had known, had carried the secret with her, and now they were laying it bare for all to hear. The guests shifted uneasily, whispering in disbelief. This wasn't how things were done. Revelations in the monarchy were carefully choreographed, massaged by advisors, rolled out through controlled statements. But Catherine had bypassed all of it. In one moment, she shattered protocol, leaving courtiers unable to shield the family from the fallout. What had been intended as a night of tradition turned into a spectacle of vulnerability and rebellion. Yet amid the chaos, Catherine's voice never wavered. Her calm was almost eerie, as if months of turmoil had forged her into unshakable steel. She did not cry or falter. Her words carried the ache of loss, the fire of defiance, and the determination of a woman refusing to be reduced to whispers behind closed doors. For too long, her truth had been hidden. Tonight, she reclaimed it, even at the risk of unraveling the monarchy's carefully spun image. What those at the table didn't yet understand was that Catherine's confession was not the end. It was the beginning. Her revelation was more than a statement of fact. It was a warning, a call to attention, a prelude to something darker, heavier, and far more devastating than anyone dared imagine. The nation believed Catherine was mother to three heirs, but behind palace walls, there had been a fourth whose story was never told until now. Her voice, calm but heavy with sorrow, carried in silence, unveiled a secret hidden even from the press's watchful eyes. For years, the world celebrated the image of a perfect royal family, three children, symbols of continuity and hope. But the truth was more fragile, more human. Catherine revealed she had carried a fourth life, a child that never took its place beside the others, erased by silence before it could be embraced by the nation. The weight of that revelation bore down on every heart in the room. It wasn't scandal, it was raw, unfiltered grief, a pain no palace official could choreograph. Her words painted a portrait of hidden suffering, late nights spent alone, hollow smiles at public engagements, the unbearable burden of mourning a child while facing cameras demanding perfection. She had mastered concealment, hiding heartbreak beneath tiaras and gowns, never allowed to appear vulnerable. That mask cracked before those who least expected it. William's struggle was etched in every breath beside hers. Torn between the duty of silence and the agony of watching his wife bear sorrow without acknowledgement, he had held her as she wept behind palace doors, even as he stood firm before the nation. The man who would be king carried both his people's expectations and his wife's pain, a weight few could endure. For him, Catherine's truth was not just a confession. It was a release, a moment when private heartbreak surfaced into light the world had never known. The press, relentless in its pursuit of royal stories, had missed this one completely. The palace machine, built to conceal, had worked flawlessly. Every sign was explained away, every absence brushed aside, every whisper smothered. To the outside world, there was no trace of the fourth child. That was why Catherine's words cut so deeply. In one moment, she undid years of silence with a truth so human, it shattered the illusion of control. Around the table, dignitaries, guests, and family sat frozen, many reduced to tears. It wasn't just the story of a lost child, it was a story of a resilience, of a woman who bore pain in shadows for too long. Her strength lay not in hiding it, but in daring to reveal it, no matter how it threatened the image of royal perfection. Catherine's reason for breaking her silence wasn't only sorrow, it was defiance. If grief shaped her silence, Camilla's shadow forced her confession into the open. For months, quiet remarks had passed through corridors, wrapped in courtesy but carrying the sting of dismissal. Camilla had allegedly waved away Catherine's absences as fragile nerves, a veiled insult painting her as weak and unfit for royal duty. In private, Catherine endured these insinuations, which cut deeper than any headline. But on this night, with the world's eyes upon her, she refused to stay quiet. Rumors seeded from Camilla's circle grew bolder, suggesting strain, instability, and questions about Catherine's strength to one day be queen. Every whisper chipped away at her credibility, planting doubt among allies and family. Catherine knew this pattern, subtle like ruthless palace politics. By revealing her truth, she struck back with her voice, a weapon stronger than rumor. Her words exposed sorrow and reclaimed dignity. No longer the whispered about consort too delicate for royal life. She demonstrated resilience forged through pain. What Camilla branded as weakness, Catherine transformed into defiance. For the first time in years, the balance of power shifted across the royal table. Catherine was no longer the silent figure beside William. She was the voice that shattered silence, the force refusing to be diminished. Anne, seated nearby, offered support not in words but in presence, straightening in her chair, her expression unwavering, her silence carrying approval. Anne's history as the family's pillar lent gravity to her endorsement, a message not lost on those present. Catherine's stance had the weight of history behind it, but if Catherine's voice carried grace, William's reaction burned with fury. When Camilla tried to interject, dismissing the confession as untimely, William's restraint shattered. His anger flared not in a raised voice but in words sharp enough to silence the room. His defense of Catherine was more than marital loyalty. It was a declaration that her truth would not be silenced, not by Camilla or anyone. The future king had drawn his line, and beside him stood the woman who would one day reign. The dinner, once bound by courtesy, became an invisible battlefield, a war of queens unfolding before stunned guests. Camilla, rattled and furious, found herself pushed into the shadows by Catherine's revelation. As the air thickened with tension, one truth became clear. The monarchy had entered a new chapter where silence would no longer protect its fractures. Catherine's decision to speak had a deeper purpose, tied to the crown's future. This wasn't just about grief, it was about legacy. A child lost, yet a truth weaponized to safeguard the Windsor bloodline. By keeping her loss hidden, she had allowed whispers to grow. Whispers that Camilla's influence could spread into the heart of the crown. In palace gossip, that danger was taking form. For Catherine, truth was necessity. In a family where every title, birth, and word carry political weight, secrecy could be a weapon for others. If she didn't control the story, someone else would. Silence could be twisted into proof of fragility or incompetence. She refused to let her pain be leveraged or her silence manipulated. That night, she shattered the whispers before they could destroy her. William's anger had simmered for months, now surging. He had heard corridor murmurs, half-spoken conversations suggesting Camilla's grandson, an outsider to the Windsor line, might stand closer to the throne than deserved. To William, it was treachery masked as speculation. Catherine's truth gave him strength to make his fury visible, carved into every word and glance. Catherine wielded precision, not rage. Her words were shield and sword, mourning openly while cutting through the pretense of loyalty cloaking the dinner. By claiming her lost child's place in the succession story, she reinforced her family's legitimacy, leaving no room for Camilla's ambitions to creep into the future. She turned a threatening narrative into a fortress around her children. Anne, firm, largely silent, offered judgment with a subtle nod, enough to be noticed, enough to be understood. Having lived in service to the institution, hardened by duty, her acknowledgement of Catherine's strength was no small gesture. It was an unspoken alliance, signaling Catherine's stance had history's weight. The dinner's atmosphere shifted entirely. What began as pageantry interrupted by tragedy became a political declaration. Catherine made her pain inseparable from the crown, ensuring the monarchy's future bore her words' imprint. Grief became power. Silence became rebellion. But Catherine's words reopened long-buried wounds. All eyes turned to Charles, whose silence was louder than thunder. The king, expected to steady the family, sat frozen, gripping the table as if it were his only anchor. His pale face and vacant expression showed the weight of Catherine's words. This wasn't just a family revelation, it was an earthquake. And Charles, frail and weary, seemed powerless to contain the tremors. His authority, already fragile, looked shattered. The family no longer appeared united under his crown. Catherine's revelation created a fissure, spreading fast. Guests whispered not of the monarch's strength, but of the collapse of promised unity. The crown sat heavy on a man unable to carry its weight. Old ghosts returned. Diana's name, unspoken but alive, hovered like a haunting. Guests recalled her suffering, isolation, and buried secrets. Catherine's grief echoed those memories with painful clarity. Unlike Diana, who endured in silence, Catherine refused to be silenced, making Charles appear diminished by the echoes of a woman whose presence still loomed larger than his authority. Charles was torn between Camilla, seething at his side, and William, unwavering beside Catherine. Camilla's fury was evident in her clenched jaw and sharp breaths, demanding he defend her and restore order. William's defiance burned fiercely, his loyalty to Catherine unbreakable. Charles, trapped, said nothing. His silence was weakness, surrender. Guests saw a king unable to defend his crown, a father unable to control his son, a husband unable to calm his wife. The monarchy's image of unity unraveled. The room no longer carried tradition's weight, but the stench of division and collapse. Camilla's fury grew as Charles offered no defense, no dismissal of Catherine's revelation. His silence fed her rage, exposing his reign's crumbling foundation. The man who should have led looked like a powerless figurehead, his voice drowned in hesitation and fear. Witnesses sensed the magnitude. This wasn't about one revelation, but a monarchy unable to withstand its secrets, a family fractured before its guests. Catherine delivered the final blow. I will no longer stay silent, no matter the when. Her words cut through like a blade, shattering centuries of restraint. In a family built on secrets, she chose truth spoken aloud, not whispered or hidden. Her voice didn't shake. Her resolve didn't falter. She was no longer a consort deferring to the crown, but a woman wielding suffering as a weapon against those who sought to diminish her. The chaos couldn't shake her composure. Where others would have bowed, Catherine stood firm. Her grief, once buried, became her shield. Every sorrowful memory gave her strength to resist manipulation, making her more dangerous than her critics imagined. Her strength lay not only in what she revealed, but in refusing to let it be twisted into weakness. William's hand in hers, small but powerful, bound them in unity. His silence was solidarity, making clear her truth was his. The future king and his consort were no longer background figures in a crumbling monarchy. They were the unshakable center, pulling the crown towards its next chapter. Camilla tried to strike back, painting Catherine's revelation as ill-timed, disruptive, reckless. But her dismissal fell flat, and the room, leaning toward Catherine, turned colder with every attempt to silence her. Camilla's visible unraveling contrasted with Catherine's calm defiance, permanently shifting the balance of power. Then came Princess Anne's voice, not thunderous, but with quiet strength, carrying decades of service and sacrifice. She praised Catherine's courage, acknowledging that speaking truth in a room designed for silence required rare strength. Her intervention broke the tension like sunlight through storm clouds, signaling family elder support and lending legitimacy to Catherine's defiance. Guests, moved by Anne's words and Catherine's honesty, rose in applause, a startling breach of protocol in a setting where emotion was suppressed. They applauded Catherine not as a princess bound by tradition, but as a woman who bared her soul and refused to be silenced. The palace walls had never heard such defiance, and the applause echoed beyond the room. But as the applause faded, Catherine knew this was not an ending but the start of a dangerous new chapter. When the doors closed, nothing in the monarchy would be the same. Corridors buzzed with whispers, courtiers rushing between chambers, faces etched with shock. Word of Catherine's confession spread like fire, and it was only a matter of time before the public knew. Outside, anticipation built. Questions would erupt, headlines would blaze, and the truth Catherine guarded would no longer be hers alone. Camilla moved swiftly, plotting to seize control of the narrative. Yet her fury was overshadowed by Charles, confined to his bed, too frail to endure the storm. A leadership vacuum loomed. One William and Catherine seemed destined to fill. Their unity, tested in sorrow, became the monarchy's lifeline. The secret fourth child became more than a memory, a symbol of sorrow endured and defiance unchained. Catherine's revelation wasn't just about the past, it was about rewriting the monarchy's future, no matter the cost.